I'm very happy this evening to introduce Katie Turner. Katie is a registered psychologist who practices here in Calgary. Do you practice anywhere else?
All over Alberta.
Now
New Brunswick.
And now New Brunswick. She is also a speaker and an intuitive guide. She believes in a holistic approach to healing, something that we probably all favor these days, holism being so crucial to how we make our way through the world, looking at all angles of our health and the health of others. Katie is passionate about helping people heal from past trauma and past difficulties, and in overcoming limiting beliefs that will create lasting transformation. She speaks on psychology and spirituality, and the spirituality of creating change, and she offers one-on-one sessions, workshops, and groups to provide healing and guidance to spiritual seekers, that's us, and highly sensitive and empathic people. She has a website. The print is very small. KatieTurnerPsychology.com. Yes. And tonight, some of you may have seen the blurb that was sent out. I'll just read you what it says. The topic that Katie will be speaking on is meditation as a gateway for connecting with your intuition. And the commentary is, we all have the potential to connect with our own intuitive knowing. When intuition is combined with logic, we can make better decisions and develop a deeper sense of trust and peace in the face of the unknown. There's a lot of that around right now, isn't there? We will be discussing ways of receiving information, how to find out your dominant intuitive type, and how to increase your ability to receive intuitive information. Before I turn the podium over to Katie, maybe we should just take a minute to settle in our chairs and be sure we're comfortable, and just a few deep breaths to settle. Make sure we're relaxed, we've let the day go. We're now just aware of our presence in this room with other people who are really just like us, with superficial differences. And we can just let go of our assumptions and open our minds to hear what Katie has to tell us.
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here and speak on this topic and see how many people turned out, even with the snow today. Yeah, so
can you hear it back?
Okay. Yeah. So a big part of my journey is just the intuitive and the spiritual side wasn't something I was always working on or into. I went through my own spiritual awakening after having my master's in psychology. Before that, it was all very science-based. Anything like intuitive, spiritual, I would have thought was really like woo-woo, like maybe placebo effect at best of like, okay, if you believe in it, sure, that can be powerful, but like, I don't know what there is or what might be out there. And a kind of very summarized version is, it was kind of my own burnout in the mental health system and like limitations of just cognitive mind focus alone, that I went on more of a kind of, I didn't know it at the time, but more spiritual quest, and ended up going to India and Nepal for about a year. And for a number of years, I had kind of one foot in like the professional world, and then also like very much in the spiritual closet outside of that. So I would explore more of the intuitive, more of the energy dynamic. Like a lot of the experience I started to have in that spiritual awakening, like really made me question my sense of reality, like what was taught, going into just having that intuitive piece open up. Like it's not, some people talk about intuition where it's like they're an intuitive healer or medium, and they've always had those abilities, they were born with them. If someone would have told me at that period of my life that this is something I'd end up doing professionally, like I would have laughed in their face and thought they were ridiculous. Like I didn't think it was real. But then I had enough experiences kind of through that journey where I was like, there's definitely something here. And so I think it's something Now it's something that's really a core pillar of the work that I do. And a lot of the clients that I work with is really connecting with like, how do we connect with that for ourselves? Because I think we all do have access to it. It is, I've done a lot of work around, because my left brain and logic brain was really wanting to be like, well, how can we explain this on the science side of things? That it's really like there is science for both. And I think that spiritual component is really an essential part of all of us, and we can define it in different ways. But intuition is kind of our direct like gateway to that. So we'll talk a bit about like what intuition is, what like the benefits for it, and the ways it can show up. What's important about knowing like how it shows up is that when you know how it shows up, then you can more consciously work with it. So it's something that we can all develop more, and having kind of the right tools and support can help kind of open it up and increase that ability. And so a meditation is really like the foundational doorway to consciously work with it more. And so intuition itself is really more just, it's our ability to understand something without like beyond logic alone or the rational mind alone. Most people have some kind of experience with it. So as I talk about the types, just kind of keep in mind for yourself of like, hey, have I noticed this before or in past times for myself? It's really, I do think it's part of our, almost like our spiritual self, or like that connection with something bigger than us, however you choose to define that. It's the way those like personalized messages come through to us. So it can be kind of our own personalized guidance system, which can be really helpful because it's helpful to get logical information and know your options for others, but you can get a lot of different answers and still not know what's right for you. Intuition will really help you know like what is the right thing for you. I do think it's also tied, it can be tied to a bit of a spirituality or spiritual awakening process for people. And sometimes the more you connect with intuition, the more those spiritual awakening symptoms may happen as well. So I want to just kind of note that in case that's something that could happen for you on the path as well. And spirituality is really our personal connection with something bigger than ourselves. So it doesn't have to be tied to any religion or religious practice. That's more of the group rules and guidance. And so you can have both. You could have neither one. You could be spiritual without being religious. It's really whatever kind of fits for you. And with the spiritual awakening, like the interesting thing about spirituality is it is one of the things, there's research done, there's a Gallup poll out of the US where one of the questions they asked people was like, have you ever had a spiritual or religious experience that changed the direction of your life? And almost half of participants answered strongly agree. So like that was the strongest answer of like almost 50% of the population who answered that survey said they've had a profound spiritual or religious experience that changed the course of their life. So it is really common. And the more I started talking more publicly about this and working with people, it's like a lot of people do have these experiences, but I totally understand that our modern mental health system like often doesn't really know where to classify them. So if you start talking about like hearing voices or like a deceased relative talking to you or like angels, you might want to be a little bit careful in the mental health system where you share that, because a lot of time it can flag like, it often kind of falls over psychosis type illness really covers it. And there's a very, very small section at the very end of the DSM where it's like other spiritual concerns, like not really otherwise specified. It's a few sentences long, and that's basically it. That's in the whole thing. So one of the things I work with people a lot is I tend to work with a lot of pretty grounded people who also have that side, but are kind of careful who they talk to about that. And I do understand why. But the thing is like those types of consciousness and experiences can happen, and it doesn't mean it's a sign of mental illness or that you're like going crazy. I won't talk a lot about that here, but in general, if you're feeling stable in things, you can function in day-to-day life, like it's usually pretty safe to proceed, and that can actually be very helpful. If those things aren't there, then you may want to slow down, like seek professional support. I have resources for that as well. But basically with that piece around, like when it comes to intuition, there's quite a lot out there. And one of the pieces around spiritual awakenings, intuition, is one of the things I found for myself and for a lot of clients kind of going through that process or exploring that is it's hard to really know where to get credible resources or support around that. There's most like health professionals, there are people who navigate both worlds, but they're usually pretty quiet and not very public about it, because you do have to have evidence-based training, there's code of ethics you need to follow, which is positive. But so a lot of the online spaces, and if you Google stuff, like be very careful who you listen to with Google, and online, social media, there can be helpful information, but there's a lot of really problematic and harmful and even like potentially dangerous information out there as well. I think some of this will likely increase as well as we have more use of like psychedelic therapy and other pieces, because this is like opening up that process for a lot of people as well. So some pieces around intuition itself, some of the myths or misconceptions about it is that some people, like there can be a misconception that intuition isn't real, or it's like logic is more valid than intuition. And that's not quite true. Like intuition it's very real. Many people talk about it. It does take practice to learn how to discern like what is your intuition, and like learn to trust it and trust yourself in that process. So that's not an overnight process, but it can provide us with information that like logic alone can't. I think most people, like myself included, I learned that intuition was real like before spiritual awakening, before any of that, based on like really strong knowings or insights where I was like, this feels crazy, and then I was right. Like I was like, damn. So I think most of us learn the hard way of like not listening to something, of being like, no, they're totally trustworthy, or like, no, there's a good person, and like, or just I'm gonna ignore this really bad feeling and do this anyway, and then be like, oh, but there was no way logically to have known that. And it seems like you're being anxious, but sometimes it's a warning. So the other side is that, again, that the intuition is rare, because I think we see people who kind of do it publicly or big, wider scale, and it seems like this really clear, like crazy abilities, but we all have some level of it. And I also think it's like people outside of us who have more experience can help us, but we don't ever want to give somebody else like the power to make decisions for our life, because intuition really, it's not like 100% science, and it's really symbolic, metaphoric, like it's open to mistranslation. People's own stuff can get in the way with it. So even skilled like psychics or readers, like, so I've had bad readings. I've had some people come in and be like, oh, they said this, and it's just like, oh, it doesn't mean it's true. Like you don't have to take that on. Other people can help us, but like really knowing like what resonates or lands within us is more important than somebody else making decisions for you. Yeah, and again, like intuition it's not always right or true. It's not 100%. It takes a lot of time and practice to learn to tease it out. I've done a lot of work with mine. It's really strong. I use it in a lot of ways, but I'm never like, oh, 100% this is going to be it. Like again, it can be metaphoric, it can be symbolic, like the way something comes through for someone intuitively. It might be like an image or a symbol or like certain numbers repeating. It's like that can mean one thing for one person and a very different thing for someone else, and still be like true intuition for them. So those are some of the myths. Some of the kind of traps people can get into with intuition is, because intuition is great, like it's really nice to have it, but it takes time and practice to build up to it. And usually the times when we actually really want it or need it the most, it's the hardest for us to access. So when it's really emotionally laden, when there's a lot of stress around something, when we really want like an answer to something, those are the hardest times to get it. So it's usually easier to kind of practice developing that with things that are lower emotional investment, a little more fun, a little lighter, maybe for other people or neutral. And a lot of times people kind of get caught in this piece of like really wanting to get there, or like wanting a certain way to have it. So I'll talk a little bit about like different sensory abilities, the way it can come through. But the main thing is that we all have kind of one or two dominant ways that we don't choose. We just have them. And we can get caught up in a trap of really wanting it to come a certain way, seeing like, oh, so-and-so can do this, and I want to receive a message like that, or be able to see things, hear things. A lot of times people also get in this like kind of thing of like really focusing on destination versus process. And I was definitely guilty of this in the beginning, because I would see people with these abilities and this ability to do this, and mine were just starting to open up. And I was like, oh, I want to know what my gifts are. Like, I hear that from a lot of people of like, what are my gifts? What's my way? Kind of like it's a Christmas present and you get to like unwrap it and then you have it and now you can go use it and like that's your thing. But it's really, I've come to see kind of through my own like evolution of this process and working with like, it's probably hundreds, maybe getting close to thousands now, of that. For most people it is more of a slow unfolding, and it's not like an arrival. Like, so whatever if there's anything you resonate with tonight, it's like that's your starting point now, and just being open that if this is kind of a path you feel called to or commit to keep working with, that can often evolve over time and show up in different ways as you pay attention to it, as you bridge it. It's like it can shift and change. So I'll go over some of the common ways, and just knowing that in that process, like one might be dominant right now, and if you stay on that path, like a year or months later, it's like it could shift and another way could come in. So another part where a lot of people get into trouble with intuition is like, we're so trained and taught in our culture for our rational mind to run everything. It's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? What are you going to do when you graduate? Like, how are you going to figure this out? Like, figure out what you want to do, reverse engineer it, and then take all the steps to get there. That usually we kind of subconsciously want intuition to serve our rational mind. So it's almost like, give me this answer, tell me all the steps, show me exactly what I want, and tell me now. And it doesn't work for the rational mind. So it won't give it to you in that way. So that's part of the like surrender process. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It doesn't mean it's not there. It operates differently. So one of the quotes I really like from Albert Einstein is that the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We've created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. So I think it's really about having intuition be able to guide us, to give us that guidance, to give us that clarity, and rational mind can really help serve that in the 3D world and in the human experience. So it's also just that it's not a new concept. Like, it's been around for a long time. It's had different emphasis in different time periods or cultures. I think our culture, like Western colonial culture, has been very like separate and materialistic, and like we're separate from the rest of the world. But I think that is starting to shift. Even when I kind of started my practice with this as the foundation, I was like, I don't know if there's even going to be interest in this, but I was blown away really quickly at like how many people were ready and like eager and having stuff already happen for them. So, I mean, the intuitive and logical mind, they both have different skill sets. Like, it's almost like they're the managers of different departments, and they're meant to be. But our kind of cultural system really creates like logical mind has to take over everything, and logical mind isn't really equipped to do everything. So intuition will often give us like, sometimes we may get a sense or a feeling. It might be like a dream, an image, a flash, a kind of knowing, or a real call to be like, it might be like a longer term picture, whether it's like maybe a career, a vision, something. And then it can also give us like, what's the right step from where we are right now? What direction feels okay or not okay? Logic is really good at filling in all the steps in between, and logic wants all the steps in between. And that's one of the hardest pieces around actually like trusting intuition to guide our life more, is like intuition will not actually tell us every single step along the way. It's like, it's part of like the magic of the journey, and kind of the trust into the unknown. It's almost like a co-creative process with you and the universe or your higher self, or like something bigger than you that's like guiding you beyond just yourself alone. And so it also like doesn't tell us everything in all the same ways. I think sometimes if it did, when I look back on my life, I'm like, I don't know if I would have wanted to do that if I knew all the steps. So maybe there's a wisdom in it too. Yeah. And sometimes we just don't know what's coming. Like I have so many examples, and I'll kind of share some as I go. But I mean, one just light one was like, it was 2018 or 2019. I was just suddenly like, I have to redo my website and I have to get all this done. And I was like, I don't really understand why this doesn't make sense logically. Got it done. The pandemic hit a couple months later and everything was online. So suddenly it was like, your web presence needs to be. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, that's done. But I don't think there was any logical information that could have come in to prepare me for that, because I wouldn't have believed it. Yeah. And basically, like, the other part too is when we're going into working with intuition more, there's a lot around like trusting it or wanting to trust it, but I want to validate that is a process that takes time, and it also takes evidence and feedback with it too. Like, I wouldn't, trust is earned, like whether that's a person, whether that's any relationship, even if that's a spiritual relationship, like if it's not giving you helpful information or credible information, like don't trust it. Something's like not quite right there. So I wouldn't trust in the intuitive experiences I have if I hadn't had like the feedback loop of like, oh, this makes sense, or here's the evidence, or this was correct, or this is like verifiable in some way. And there's definitely lots in there that's not able to be verified, but I have enough there that my logical mind is like, I don't fully get this, but I trust that it knows what it's doing, and I trust that if I don't, and also I've had enough experiences of like, if I ignore this, it doesn't end well. So I don't want to do that again. And even there, it's like I make most of my decisions based on like intuition and logic. And if the logic is there and the intuition says no, I don't go forward without either like working to make sure that's clear or going. But I still have moments where I'm like, I don't know if I fully trust this yet. So I think it's always an evolving process. And it's not like, I mean, I could go on a whole side note of like all the toxic spirituality stuff that's out there. I'm putting together like a little mini guidebook around that too, because I think a lot of the manifestation stuff gets really like messed up around like, oh, well, you didn't believe or you didn't trust, so now this happened to you. And it's like, that's not actually how this works. And it's really harmful. And it's really not nervous system or like trauma or psychologically informed at all. So yeah, but I'll pause that one because that's a total side on. Yeah. And so like just some of the like kind of basics to put some of the science behind this, and I can give anyone more resources if they want this. But one of the things I found helpful in terms of like trying to make sense of the intuitive experiences to be like, okay, if I'm not going crazy and what's going on with this, like I think a lot of the stuff coming out of the quantum physics research is really helpful there, because it really just talks about how our reality is basically energy and a unified field of consciousness, and we're individual experiences of that consciousness. So if that's like the nature of reality on kind of an energetic realm, it's like, it's not so far of a stretch to be like, maybe there's a part of us that can actually like tap into that and is built into that. Because then it gets into like kind of multiple realities and multiple possibilities. And with that again too, like on that multiple reality level, intuition, it's not like this is the one thing to do. There's often multiple possibilities. So it's not always like this is the only way. And there's some really interesting, like even research that's been done. There's a book called The Awakened Brain, which like summarizes some of the research of Dr. Lisa Miller. I forget if I'm forgetting if she's a psychiatrist or a neuroscience scientist out of the US, but she wasn't looking for spirituality in her research. She was looking for more of like depression, anxiety, like what makes healthier brains from brains that aren't as resilient or healthy. And she stumbled on the finding of like spiritual brains are actually a lot healthier than non-spiritual brains. And like achievement, if we're stuck in the achievement of like the ego mind of like the career, the next steps, the checklist, like the brain scans of those brains are way more vulnerable to depression, anxiety, like loss of purpose. Whereas more of like flow states, religious, like spiritual experience, that connection, that present moment awareness, again, like mindfulness type practice, the brains were a lot more resilient. And one of her early studies that kind of catapulted her career into this area and more funding for this research was she found that daughters in high risk areas, like if they shared a spiritual connection with their mothers and spiritual practice with their mothers, their brains had a 5-time protective factor for like depression, mental health issues, anxiety, and these are in some of the like highest risk communities. So the potential for it in terms of like the mental health connection is fantastic. And there's just such potential for healing and resiliency in difficult times with it. Her research, she does such a good job of summarizing like the neuroscience and why the benefit with it. But her conclusion basically, and she talks about her own spiritual awakening in that process too, but she talks about evidence of like we are part of a field of consciousness, and her kind of conclusion is like our brains are actually wired to receive information from that. Like we're designed to be in communication with the universe. So, and this is not new for other cultures and other areas. Like that's what they've been saying the whole time. And she said that this connection can really bring us great healing and resiliency in the face of challenge and adversity. And when we go through challenge and adversity, like our brains are and have this connection, our brains have developed greater resiliency and less risk for like mental health, addiction, anxiety, connection. But if we don't have that connection, we can have greater risk of like repeating depression, anxiety, other mental health conditions. So again, there's a lot more research in there, but there is research there. So that connection, it leads to a lot more of an inspired, purposeful life. And we can better handle the hard stuff. It doesn't take away the hard stuff. It's not about not feeling that. Like that again gets into that kind of toxic bypassing of like, oh, everything happens for a reason. It's like, no, we still are having a human experience. We still have to move through human emotions. It can just help us navigate that. It can help us find purpose in it. It can help us keep going. So, and I think like there's really important and profound implications for this as well too, because, you know, if we're not separate from each other, other life, the planet, like we have to change how we live, like individually and collectively. And I think like with all the challenges kind of in the world today and how those seem to be amplifying, like I think it was Einstein again, where there's another quote of like, you can't solve problems with the same consciousness that created it. It's like, I do think we need like an awakening in consciousness to like birth the solutions or have the solutions come from a different place. So anyway, so that's some of the benefits on the research level for intuition. I think for like people individually, it can really help us. It can help us make better decisions and feel more confident in the decisions we do make. It can be a resource that we can turn to like navigate that with less anxiety, less stress, less kind of mental looping of going over and over and over things. It can really be protective. And I mean, I think the biggest thing for me was like going through that intuitive awakening was like, it kind of felt like, what's the point before it? It's like, do we just work, save for retirement, and then like and then you like die and that's it? Like, why is that it? But the intuitive awakening piece, it's like when you're feeling in connection, like having actual real experiences of like, there's something else here and I'm part of it. It's so I'm gonna get a little emotional. It's like so transformative where you're like, there's all this support and love here. Like it almost switches it to like, I felt like I was a kid again, where it's like, this feels magical again. Like this feels like an adventure and like really cool and really like there's a lot of possibilities here. So I'm really grateful for that. And I think it helps us increase feelings of peace and trust in the unknown. It helps us know that we're like loved and like valuable just as we are. Like it can lead to a lot greater meaning, passion, and purpose, and really help transform our lives for the better. Like I think some of the challenges with it is that it does take time and practice and learning. It's not like a light switch or a button. It's really kind of a gradual piece. I mean, it's different for every person. Most people, it is more of a slow process over time and integrated. Some people can have a really quick one. That isn't always a good thing. So I wouldn't like chase that. That can actually be traumatic or problematic. Again, that's like another talk, but it's just kind of like aim for slow and steady, like let it integrate. Don't go too much. If anyone like credible advises you like not to do something in that realm, like please listen or get another opinion, especially in the psychedelic realm, like that, or anything really intense like that. So it's also like, there can be challenges too, because it's not that commonly understood or supported. So sometimes you're kind of going against the grain culturally and people may not get it. You can't talk to everyone about it or be understood or supported in that. So it's important to have community, other people who understand, like who don't think you're crazy. And it does require us to confront, it can require us to confront a lot of our stuff as well. Like, so it's not always just like fun and sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes it will show like, this is where you need to evolve and heal. And like, here's some stuff you need to look at. And there can be a lot of fear too, because it's a lot of like leap of faith into the unknown. Like it'll often keep challenging us to grow. So yeah, so that's a bit about some of the like background and importance. Some of the ways that intuitive knowing can come through is like, there's some ways that it just kind of shows up, and then there's other ways where we can consciously work with it more. So one of the first ways to kind of notice or work with intuition, and in Lisa Miller's book, she actually recommends this as like the first place to start, or start recording it, start noticing it. So the more we notice it and the more we pay attention to intuition, the more it'll open up. It is something, again, like we all have the potential for intuitive ability, but some people, it's just like any other skill where like some kids are more naturally gifted athletes, some are more artistic, but all of them can get better with practice. So we're not all starting in the exact same place, but like if we put in the time and energy and commitment, it's like we can get better from where we are now. It is a muscle that it can work. So synchronicities are really the sense of like a divine coincidence. Like it feels like something that you're like, this feels really related, but it's not logically related. It may be, if you've ever had experiences of, you think about a person, someone mentions them, and then you run into them, and they're not someone you usually see, and you're like, what's going on with like Dave from back then, or whoever? Or it could be just like you're struggling with something personally, you're asking for guidance, and you have like 3 different people recommend the same book, and you're like, what's with this book? So I think a lot of us have experiences like that. We'll often just rush it up of like, that was kind of weird. That was a weird coincidence, but that can be a first part to start paying attention to those. I kind of have a general rule of thumb that I'm like, if there's something very similar or like a similar, very similar, like eerily similar pattern or like a synchronicity like this, that's like 3 times in a short amount of time, I'm like, okay, what is this? I'm going to take a minute to check in. There's some kind of message here potentially. Carl Jung's work talks a lot about synchronicities as well, like kind of more early psychology founding of like that synchronicities are a gateway to our deeper internal processes, and they carry messages that help guide us, just like in our dreams. So really, the first step can be kind of paying attention to those. Dreams can be another way. Some people get intuitive information through their dreams. There's regular kind of processing dreams. Those often are just, they can be, some people are more vivid dreamers than others, and some people don't really remember their dreams. That's okay. Intuitive dreams feel different than regular dreams. So sometimes they're very symbolic, metaphoric, like it can take it takes deciphering to be like, what's the more dream interpretation, to be like, what was that crazy scene and message and the feeling, and what does this actually translate to? I've also had intuitive dreams where there was a time when I was going to meet a friend, and like I dreamt about them the day before. We were just sitting there talking and catching up, and then I saw them the next day. I was like, are all these things happening? And they're like, yeah. Like, that was weird, but it was just very like mundane dream of talking to them, catching up, and then it was like I hadn't seen them in years, and the stuff was true. Other times, like some common ones can be like, sometimes people have dreams of a visit from like a loved one of like, I'm okay and I'm at peace, and then they wake up and it's like Nana passed away or something, and they're like, that was really weird. So dreams are kind of one way. Keeping a dream journal can be helpful with that, or recording. I'll talk more about keeping a journal too, because if intuition is something you want to open up, like keeping a journal or like a separate space, like just to kind of record things quickly, can help as well. Because paying attention in the moment helps it open up over time, but having kind of a record to go back to also helps us look at like, what of this was intuition? Where did my rational mind maybe go off with it? And we can also kind of see patterns emerge over time that we didn't notice initially. So like both is helpful. Deja vu can be another type of intuition. It comes from the French root of like already dreamed. It's kind of just that feeling of like, did we already have this? Did this happen? Did I dream about this? I think most people have had a feeling of deja vu at some point or another where you're like, this just feels weird. It feels like I've already done this or had it happen. So sometimes it may be like there's something significant happening in this moment. There's something to pay attention to. When it's really intuitive, like there's also some articles that say like sometimes there might be something actually going on neurologically, but I'm talking more the intuitive realm. The other one, like this one isn't really out there, but it's one I kind of just gave a name to. Well, I don't know if I didn't really, like, I'm not responsible for the coining of the term, but it's almost like the glitches in the matrix experience, where sometimes something happens where you're like, this is really weird. Like it might be an animal behaving really strangely, things not operating. It's kind of a thing of like, I wouldn't have believed this if I didn't see it with my own eyes and experience it myself, where like, for me, even just like going forward in psychology on the foundation of like spirituality, like that question was something I struggled with for a lot of years, because I had one foot more in this spiritual world and intuitive world, and I was trying to find a pathway forward in psychology of like, how can I do this in an evidence-based way, and like, where are the trainings, how can I bridge this together? And so I was really struggling with that question for a long time, because it's not like it's a slow process to get to the point where you can be a psychologist. And I was really ready to, like, I wasn't sure if I needed to give it up or what. And I was washing dishes and like talking on the phone with someone, and I just put the dish soap down, and this bubble like came up and floated like right in front of me. And then it just started traveling down the kitchen, and I followed it, and it was just the way it behaved. I was like, this is really weird. It was a really big bubble to come out of dish soap. And it just went uniformly in a straight path, and then it turned down the hallway. It turned down the hallway again, same pace the entire time, same space. Like, it shouldn't have done that. And then it went all the way down. It turned again. So it took 3 different turns and didn't hit any walls. I'm following it the whole time, like not listening at all. It went into this room that I had set up as like a meditation energy healing room, hovered there for a second, and then popped, and my whole body got goosebumps. And I was like, okay, I can't ask that question anymore. Like, they're probably gonna light my house on fire if I don't listen. But like, I was like, I'm not gonna get a more obvious answer than that. Like, I was like, and it didn't solve the like, well, now what, of like, how do I get here to there, or where do I go? But I was like, I can't answer which path in. Like, I can't keep asking which path, because like, I won't get a more obvious answer than that. It was still a long process of like, well, how do I actually like do this path? But it kind of answered the like, do I do this or that? And then when I doubted, I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, well, that's something there. So yeah, that's my little story of that. But those ones don't happen that often. We can't like control that or like force that to happen. It just like happens on its own. The ones that we can connect to more and actually work with is usually more through the gateways of our sensory information. So those are more of like the clairs or like the seeing. It's really through the gateway of our sensory experience, but it has a different quality to it than kind of regular day-to-day seeing. A lot of our like Hollywood and media images really put a really like dramatic picture of what this can look like, and it's usually not like that. And that's probably a good thing. Like, I don't think I would want to like see things like that in the 3D world. One ability can be like clairaudience or clear hearing. So that can be, sometimes that's just messages in more of an auditory format, and that may be something in the like real world. Like, it might be something on the radio, just overhearing the snippet of conversation, and then it has a different kind of quality to it. It's almost like time slows down. You really gets your attention. You might notice other body sensations, or it may just be like something you're like, I needed to hear that, or like, that feels like an answer to what I've been asking. So sometimes it's just like, it's actual stuff that's happening there. Other times it's kind of a voice within your own head. And I'm not talking about like psychotic breaks or like hearing voices. It's more like an internal talk. It's usually it can be quiet. Sometimes it can be loud as well. Like, if it really needs to get your attention, like sometimes it's like a stop or like a warning or a piece of like, don't go there. And other times it's more like, it seems similar to our own self-talk, but it has a different quality. So it takes practice to recognize like, what is this and how to discern it. The other ones are like clairvoyance is often the one people want to have, is like the seeing ability, or it's the one that's like kind of more popularized. And again, that can be seeing stuff in the 3D world and like something pops out at you. Like, it might be like repeating numbers, a sign or a symbol that you just keep seeing or showing up. Again, you might be reading something on a billboard that like really gets your attention and you're pulled to it. Or it can also be like, it's often more, some people can see stuff like auras or things in the 3D world, but more often people may get images in their mind's eye. Like, it's very similar to imagination, but it has a different quality. So that like practicing kind of turning into that can help in that way. For me, I get most of it kind of in mind's eye. And if there's things you can practice without, I won't get a ton into the practice tonight just because of time wise, but when we learn like which ability we have the most, it's be like, we can use meditation to kind of pay attention to be like, what am I hearing with this? What's coming up? can I play with this and practice with something else that doesn't have a lot of meaning for me, of like, maybe I just want to get some messages about this meeting that's coming up at work, or this other thing, or like the drive at this time, what's the weather going to be like? Shuffling cards and being like, what's the sense of what's on this one without looking at it? Another ability is clairsentience, or like clear feeling. So this can also be, it's really feeling stuff in our own body and symptoms. If you've ever heard of the word of like being empath, like an empath, that's also like clairsentient ability. I'm a highly sensitive person, an empath myself. The medical system and mental health system doesn't really, most people would be like, this isn't real. Like, you can imagine things, you can put yourself in someone else's shoes, but you can't feel it. I personally believe it is real. Dr. Judith Orloff is a psychiatrist out of the US. She has like a self-test and a really good website. Like, we don't know someone's experience, but like, when I first realized that I had intuitive ability, this was one of my strongest ones. So there can be someone who's emotionally empathic, where you may pick up or absorb the emotions of other people, or more physical empath, or both. So it's like, you might have a headache or something, be like, this just came out of nowhere. And then someone nearby you, it's like, oh, I have such a bad migraine today. And you're like, oh, weird. Like, it's not mine. And yeah, and with the empathic piece, like, I could do a whole other many presentations on that as well too. But I think this one sucks when you have it at first. Like, you don't get to choose it, but it's pretty overwhelming, because it's really hard to sort out like, what is your stuff and what is what is stuff that you're picking up. When I first realized, it was like mid-20s when I realized it, I was like, how long have I been doing this? Like, oh my God. And a lot of empathic people can kind of feel like something's wrong with them, when they're really almost more like the canary in the coal mine, that it's like, oh, the canary's passed out. Like, there's nothing wrong with the bird, but like, get out. It's not a good situation. So they're kind of like the lightning rod. And empathic people can have different levels of kind of boundaries in that. Like, some people take on like collective, everything around them. Some it's like just more if you really care about someone. The main thing around that is like, I think a lot of the mental health system misses stuff. Like, it only goes so far when it's like an intuitive ability, because you got to be able to like work with the intuitive ability part too, and the boundaries. It can also be like, another form of clairsentience can be like a gut feeling. A lot of people can relate to like gut feeling of like, I just have a bad feeling about this, or like, I don't have a good feeling about that person. That's usually like also an intuitive sense as well. It can also show up as like physical sensations kind of in the body too. So sometimes there's like a goosebump, or like something happening in a physical way, like a ringing in the ears. Like, that could be audient too, but sometimes it's just like, hey, pay attention to this as well. Claircognizance is another one. So it's like clear knowing. It's just kind of like knowing something without knowing how or why you've known it. You're like, I just know this isn't going to go well. I just don't trust this. And it's like, you can't explain why, and there's no like rational reason. So it's almost like it can be like a sudden and like really direct, almost like download of information, without the ability to kind of explain like why you know that. There's other, like, there is also taste and smell, but those don't tend to be dominant ones for people. Like, I've experienced both of them. I've seen people who have them, but they tend to be kind of a passing one. So smell most often happens when it's like connected to like a memory, or like a deceased loved one or something. Like, it may just come suddenly with no physical explanation or reason, and then pass. And other people may not kind of smell it, and it doesn't mean like it's a neurological problem or anything. Taste is more rare as well too. Like, some people get like a sense of taste of like, whether it's like a certain mineral, or again, maybe a memory, something. Those ones I wouldn't really focus on though, because I don't see them as the dominant ones. It would be more the seeing, the hearing, the knowing, the feeling. Those can be really important ones. And so in terms of like connecting with our intuition and opening that up, one of the things I like, just before I'd recommend to actually do that or explore that, is really making sure things are safe and stable first. So I forgot to mention it at the beginning, but I'm in the process of like getting some things added to my website. It should be up in the next month or a little bit more, where there'll be like a free intuitive quiz you can do, so you can get your dominant type and like ways to work with that. And also some free resources around like assessing for safety and stability, because I think there's a lot of really great teachers out there who like, or well-known ones like Joe Dispenza, other people who talk about that opening up, but there's not as much talk about like, if you have a trauma background, if there's other things going on here, if there's potential mental health things, like you don't want to do that, and there's no screening in place. So like that part worries me. And I just don't think there's enough like credible information out there. And so you do not necessarily want to increase spiritual awakening if there's like signs that you shouldn't do that, or that could be really destabilizing. Like it can really, really put people in a bad position. And again, it can help so many people, but some it'll make things worse. So really having that safety and stability first. That's kind of all I'll say about that here. And so if you're looking to kind of increase that for yourself, like some of the first things I'd recommend is like intuition kind of like drops in when we're out of our rational mind. So like one of the first thing is really like slowing down our rational mind and practices to get out of our rational mind. And that's where it works so well with meditation type practices too, because like meditation helps us slow down the mind, like witness it, get out of our heads a little bit. And I don't think we can consciously work with intuition without the meditation as the foundation and kind of the doorway of that practice. Also, even just having kind of the rituals, practices, routines, and having time in our life to practice it too, because most of us are so busy and so rushing from one thing to another, and we can get caught up in like doom scrolling or stressing or over analyzing something, that it's like actually have some practices where it's like go for a walk in nature, move your body, like try to leave it, park it for a minute and get out of your head and see what can kind of come in. If you're really stressed, things are really busy, I would probably recommend some kind of movement or doing something first before kind of sitting down to meditate and try to connect with intuition. The more we can kind of do it it's very similar to like that meditation piece of like the same practice setting, like can help kind of train our body and nervous system to start getting into that state. So when we're first working with intuition, it's kind of like wading into the shallow end of the pool, and like with support or in groups, we can go a lot deeper faster, but it's important to kind of keep doing the work of wading in, because that builds on the ability to go kind of deeper and deeper every time. So we want to be able to slow down and have that practice to connect with our intuition, to kind of get out of logical mind chatter and like be more open to it kind of dropping in. There's stories about Albert Einstein getting stuck on problems and just like thinking, and then going to have like a 5-hour bath, and then he'd have this like sudden knowing. Like it's our subconscious, it's our intuition kind of working to put things together, and sometimes we need to actually like step away from it, and like let it simmer and let it come to us. And Judith Orloff also talks about meditation too. It's like as one of the most powerful tools to open up and increase your intuition. So again, it really is that like foundational doorway. And if you already have a meditation practice, you can kind of put that, like build that in and then work with it more consciously to be like, to explore intuitive kind of questions. It might be just, if you know your dominant sense, you could kind of go in and be like, what are the images I'm getting with this? Like, what comes up in my mind's eye, maybe just recording that, having it be lighter as well too. So maybe with the topic that's not like a 10 out of 10 in intensity, but more kind of a curiosity of like, hey, we're going to go to this thing. I want to see what kind of impressions come through, and I'm really not attached to it. Like things that are less emotionally intense we can get easier. If you have a group or people where you're open to practicing that, sometimes that can help too, because you can get impressions for other people that your logical mind doesn't know. So then it's like easier to see like what of that is actually intuitive. You have permission to have that feedback. I wouldn't recommend like going around reading people and like telling them what you're getting without their permission, or even reading people without their permission. Like it's pretty invasive. It's kind of a thing of like, sometimes it's just for you to know, it's not necessarily to share. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend making like big personal life decisions off intuition alone until you have a lot of trust and foundation in that, because like sometimes again, like the intuitive realm works very differently. It can be a potential reality. It may not even if it is going to happen, there's some stuff that might happen like months, years, like decades later from when you saw it. So, or the way it came through. So it's really like, don't basically like know your limit of risk and stay within it when you are basing intuitive decisions on something. Like, don't make any decisions that you're not comfortable if it doesn't go that way. Yeah. And so really intuitive information is most helpful when it is kind of present moment focus, and meditation really does help bring our attention to that present moment. So that can help kind of increase our sensitivity and awareness for that information. And just like how we meditate, like practicing meditation, we want to practice it ongoing so it helps us in the times that we need it. Very similar for like an intuitive meditation practice. It's like the more we practice it kind of regularly day to day, the more it can actually help us in those times where we're really like, somebody tell me what to do, or like, what do I need to know about this? If we're in that kind of crisis state and then trying to get it, it's really not going to be that helpful. Yeah. So I talked about kind of being stressed on that one. Another like practice that can be helpful if it kind of resonates for you is like when we are stuck in that conscious mind kind of worry loop, it can be just turning those, instead of like, what should I do, overthinking, like if it's that piece of we are actually connected to the universe and it's communicating with us, like practice turning those into like a request for support or guidance. Like if you could use the language prayer if that fits for you. Some people really don't like that. So it's like whatever language works and resonates for you. It can just be shift the language a little bit. Like when you're taking that walk, when you're going to yoga, when you're having that meditation time, to be like, just show me what I need to know. Like help me with this. Like whatever's an all loving, safe, like divine support, like show me, tell me. You can write it out, you can say it, you can just like set that intention and see if that kind of shifts things as well. Because again, it's that synchronicity of like asking and seeing where the answers are revealed, like seeing where the like breadcrumbs or the guidance is revealed. I really do think intuition is like our own personalized like kind of compass, or almost like a modern day would be like a GPS, but it'd be like a GPS system where it's like, here's a flash of where you're going and like turn left now go straight. Like it won't be like, here's all the steps to get there. So you kind of just have to be like, okay, like I guess I'm following it. And it can also be like, no, you went off track. Like it'll also get your attention when you go off track. Sometimes it gets our attention when we go off track by like turning up things that aren't working, or like symptoms or distress. So not always, but that can be. Sometimes it's like, we're just getting your attention. Try to keep things like open-ended in those questionings, not just like a yes or no answer, because it can lead to like more rich information or more things coming through. It's almost like that, like, I mean, prayer, I'm always conscious of that word because some people, it really resonates, some people really have triggers with that. So the prayer is kind of like putting it out and asking, and like the intuitive piece is like the answering or the message coming back. Yeah, and it's also like, again, the guidance might come in the moment, or it might slowly come over time and like reveal more over time. And again, remembering it's like a process, and like part of it is like getting guidance in what you're asking now, but part of it is building the skills, so it's something you have more ongoing as well. Yeah, and putting that into using a journal to record those practices can really help. Again, it can help us review that over time to see like, okay, what ended up happening with this? Like one of the challenges, like we often get like a sense, we might get like a guidance, a feeling, a sense, and our rational mind will jump in really quickly because that's what it does. It will like fill in all the blanks. Like with guidance around things of like, I'd get stuff where I was like, okay, I feel guided to take this course. Well, I better sign up for the whole certificate track because like this is what I'm gonna do now. And it was like, no, actually the guidance was like just for that one thing, and you probably shouldn't have done all that. So now it's like, just like it doesn't mean our rational mind will almost be like, sometimes it's like, go to this event, go to this job. It's like, well, maybe I'll find this and it'll lead here. And it's like, well, maybe there's a friend or like another connection. Like a soul journey is different from an ego journey. And the intuitive piece is like, it's going to guide us on like the soul journey part of it. So it's not always like what our ego wants or expects. But it's like, that's part of the kind of magic and the mystery in that way. So, and really like having that journey, like it helps us pay more attention to it. We can look at it over time for more themes. So I think that's the main piece there. And I'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Katie. That was very interesting. I have a few things I wanted to comment about one of the things I very much appreciate is you're stressing the point that meditation is the foundation of this. And it serves so many purposes from what you're saying. Because the other thing that you emphasized is the need to be cautious and not take on too much and destabilize. And I would think what you're suggesting is meditation, as part of its being the foundation, is that it is protective. It stabilizes the mind. It trains the mind to stay.
It can, but if someone's going into like a like a traumatic spiritual awakening and it's going into like mental health territory or like losing sense of reality, I'd actually recommend someone pull back on meditation. It's like you got to pull back and stabilize because that can open it up more. Right.
And that reminds me, something else that reminded me, it's like teaching childbirth education. Those of you who have had children, the worst time to learn childbirth education is when you're in labor. And so it's always good to start 9 months ahead or 5 months ahead, because you're practicing in the low stress period, and then you're prepared for when it's that. But it's very destabilizing to try and do it when you're on the table about to give birth. It's not a helpful thing at all. In fact, it's the opposite. So yeah. I also appreciated your comments about Carl Jung and the synchronicity. And I remember, I haven't read Carl Jung in a long time, but I do remember him saying that the most dramatic and the most consistent type of healing that he's seen is when people step into that spiritual brain. That's where the healing happens. You can rattle around in all the talk and the remembering and the stories and all of that, but it's when you transcend thought and stories that's where the healing, when you find that other place in the land of the intuition. Can I say one more thing? There were so many things that came up. But the other thing was, and maybe this will open up a conversation in the room as well. I remember you were hesitant, rightly, about prayer and bringing that up. But I remember somebody asked Mother Teresa, remember her? How do you pray? And she said, well, I don't really, I don't say anything. I just listen to God. And so the obvious question was, well, what is God saying to you? And her answer was, well, he doesn't say anything either. He just listens to me. And I think that's really that nonverbal, intuitive relationship with the universe that has its own messages that you can't really put in language. So anyway, your talk was very interesting and stimulating for me to think about a bunch of things. Does anyone in the group have anything they'd like to comment on?
We have something to say. This one changed my life. I was diagnosed with bipolar 2. I had 4 months in the mental hospital, June, July 2019. I talked to this beautiful woman like a day before I went in. And our healthcare system just wants to throw medication at everything, especially mental health. And 2 weeks ago, I was here listening to this beautiful soul. And I met a wonderful man, and he said there's 3 things that I would not consider in a partner. And it would be that she was married, that she has kids, which I have generation next and next. I'm a grandmother of 3 beautiful kids. And that this person's on medication. So we were watching What the Bleep Do We Know? And I've seen that many times, but every time I'm on a different mindset, I see something different. And at near the end of the movie, we didn't finish it, he and I, because we just got talking. Then I couldn't sleep one night. I'm gonna finish watching that movie. And it was her throwing her pill bottle in the garbage can like basketball. And I said, yes, that's what I need to do, but I did it stupidly. I know I'm in the healthcare business, I'm in the wellness business. I went cold turkey on antidepressants and antipsychotics, and I do not recommend it to anybody. That's like you said, opening the floodgate, no bueno. You gotta narrow it down, zero right in, laser point focused. And have wonderful people like all of you that can support and love and care for you, because even my family is just so wickedly uncompassionate. Today I was just attacked by my eldest daughter, and it's just, I'm like, where is this coming from? It's not me. My youngest is me. The oldest is her father. So it's just like we're all mirrors bumping into each other again and again and again. And so when I found this wonderful woman, she was doing a talk at Crow Child in 2016 about self-sabotage. And that was the very first time I ever heard anything about highly sensitive or empathic. I didn't even hear what an empathic person was, but that talk you gave changed my life. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm interested to know whether anyone else is unfamiliar with the idea of an empath, and whether it's raised any questions or comments or insights after listening to Katie's talk.
Katie, my question isn't about empath or empathy. It's intuition is self-generated internally, or intuition is the universe sending me some clarity?
Yeah, there's different theories for sure and different perspectives. So there's some that would say like intuition is almost more like your subconscious and stuff, putting stuff together and making connections and putting it through. My experience with it, and like some of Lisa knows where it talks about it being external and coming internal as well. Because some of the stuff I've had in kind of my practice in that way, it's like there's some stuff that comes through. Like intuition is very much a part of my life now. Like it's very integrated. I live in both worlds almost all the time. And there's stuff that I've received intuitively that there's no way I logically would have known or had access to. Like, especially when it's strangers, other clients, and like the level of detail and like specificity and the words and the like, because some of the stuff I work with is almost like inner child stuff, intergenerational trauma. Like I've had past life stuff you can't really confirm or not, but like the intergenerational stuff sometimes can be confirmed, or like the past stuff. And it's like so like for me, I've had enough experiences with it where Dr. Brian Weiss is another interesting psychiatrist out of the US too, and he does a lot of work around past life regression, and he did not, like he stumbled into it because he kind of got frustrated working with someone and was like, just go where this started, and they went somewhere, like somewhere totally else, like different lifetime.
The first book that I ever gave you to read was It Didn't Start With You.
All right, yeah, that's like the
It's a teeny
intergenerational.
tiny one, and I don't think I've ever finished it. I brought it to Chile with us.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd read it, but we worked so hard.
Yes.
I think it's still there.
Right, yeah.
But that one started. That's.
Yeah, so I personally believe it's both, but it's kind of like, again, whatever preferences you're drawn to or feels right. Because I don't think there's one path for everyone too, like, or one like belief system or one piece that's going to resonate with everyone as well. But I do think intuitive piece can be possible to go kind of beyond. Like some people get like animal communication, other pieces. It's like it can be really expanded and show up in a lot of different ways.
Katie, I wonder if you could expound a bit more on how meditation supports intuition in terms of what we can do with our practice. Is it that we sit down to meditate in a formal way, and in that silence something arises that we listen to and hear? Or is it something that we do, we posit a question before we enter into meditation?
Yeah, I think working with it more consciously, I mean, both is possible, but working with it more consciously, I would kind of narrow a scope, because it's like the quality of answers are often pretty close to the questions. And again, it can also be a lot of a process too, because it gets kind of complex in terms of like our conscious mind, subconscious, unconscious. Like sometimes stuff may come to the surface where it's more of like, this is more of a block or a limiting belief or a past experience. So sometimes we might notice a tension or something, and that can kind of trip people up too. If they're like, I want an answer and this feels no, it's like, this might not actually be a no, but there might be something here that needs to be addressed before you get clear intuitive information. One of my teachers in the transpersonal psychology realm, like Dr. Beth Hedba, she's local in Calgary, but one of her teachings was more around like when you have a quiet mind, an open heart, and a relaxed body, it's like then you've got an intuitive message. If one of those is not quite there, it's not fully at the intuitive truth yet. But I think again, asking like, it might be like, you know, I would like an answer around this, and open-ended questions, like similar of like opening conversations, not yes or no. Might be like, show me what I need to see about this. Help me see any messages. What might be mine to heal within this? What am I paying attention to? Like, what's my learning? What direction might help me?
Right.
Yeah. And again, lighter is easier. Like lighter is easier. So it may be like if you're playing with images, you might have a couple cards shuffle up and be like, what impressions am I getting with this one that I can't see? And I'm going to turn over. What's on this? What's something where like, I'm going to go to this thing later, this dinner party, and I don't know everyone there. Like, what's some impressions I get about the people who are going to be there, how I'm going to feel, anything coming in. So it's like light, it's playful. There's not a lot of emotional investment.
Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to take on other people's energy? You just said at the beginning, it's like, is this mine? Is this someone else's? How do you recommend discerning that?
Yeah, it's definitely a process. Like it's an ongoing process. I think there's like the meditative piece around it too, can be kind of checking in and be like, is it mine, not mine, or mine and not mine? And just seeing like what does arise in the body. People often notice it because they may, you can feel okay and then you can feel really different depending on who you're around or what's going on with the people around you. And if you're sensitive to like space's energy, it's like if you're in a really like sacred kind of site, really beautiful place, like there's a lot of meditative type energy, like it might be a really beautiful studio, you're like, oh, I feel so good here. Then you walk into another room and you're like, oh, like I don't like this house, or this, like something bad happened here, like the energy of the people here like doesn't feel good. It's like you feel it in your body. It's on a lot of empathic people, it's almost like we're like a sponge and other people are Teflon, where so you can almost tell how people are feeling because you're like, it's radiating off of you. Whereas other people are like, ah, whatever, like, or they didn't even notice, and you're like, that must be nice. But I do find empathic ability, a lot of people, we don't realize like how much we're doing it. So like that's part of the work I do with people, is helping them recognize like, is this yours, not yours? Like what's kind of coming in? Yeah.
It can be interesting too, because for me, I'm highly that way, and it can be days after.
Yeah.
Like it can have like really lingering effects, and then to have that prompt, it's like, oh, actually, something 3 days ago that's still affecting hasn't been properly. So do you have some recommendations on how we might clear that for ourselves?
Yeah, there's a couple things. This is such an in-depth topic though as well, but there's I think there's pieces around like energy hygiene type techniques, like the meditation piece can really dovetail nicely with that one too, in terms of intentional, like imagining putting up some kind of protection, like clearing and releasing can really help a lot. A lot of the work that's out there for empathic ability, it's like I have a bit of a different experience or take on it too, is that there's a lot around like you have this here's how to manage it, it's kind of just this is how it's always going to be. Because I have a lot of training in more of the depth work and the unconscious processing, my experience with it is like, I think there's pieces of like, if we're our own little energy boat in like the ocean of energy, if we have a lot of holes in the boat, we're like taking on a lot of other energy. So a lot of cleansing stuff is like scooping it out, but there's still some places, like even with clearing and protecting, that we can still take on other people's energy really quickly. Like it doesn't keep everything out. So sometimes like that deeper like healing of why we take it on in the first place is like a longer term process. And like personally for me, I like, it's not really my dominant ability anymore. Because I've worked a lot with it to be like, I don't want to feel it like this and be like, but it's been a lot of like deeper inner child work and other stuff to be like, because we grow up with this nervous system and in this culture and society with no one teaching us, no ways of managing like this intuitive ability, no guidance. So even in good enough childhoods, most kids like internalize a lot, feel responsible for everybody's emotions, like take everything on or trying to fix it. Like, oh, you're upset, like I better go make you feel better because like developmentally, like that's appropriate. And none of the adults knew what was going on. But then we carry that into adulthood and we're like, I don't want to do this anymore. But just learning about boundaries alone isn't enough because the energetic boundaries still aren't there. So we almost have to like build the energetic boundary to be like, how can I like be in my energy bubble, still know what's going on here, but be able to respond from here, not absorbing it all for them or processing it all for them? Because yeah.
You know what worked for me? I became a Reiki master.
Okay. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
break that energy.
Yeah.
All over the
Yeah.
place. You know, when you see the, you know, the sand in the rake,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can teach anybody how to do it.
Yeah. Like any practice that works. Like I find it's like so individual for people
'Cause
too. Like yeah.
We're transmuting
Yeah.
and that's exactly, because I want harmony wherever I go.
Mhm.
And if there's not harmony, I'm transmuting. And sometimes you walk into like horrible, like a bomb just went off. And to transmute that to make it all pretty, like
Yeah.
rainbows and Care Bears, you know, like it's not easy.
Yeah, there's ways to work with it, and sometimes intuitive messages, like I've had stuff of like that clearing, protecting, like working with the energy, and other times where it's like guidance of like it's time to like actually try to get out of this or like move away from this because like the
And
other
I-
pieces of
And I
it.
got my Reiki master like
Yeah.
3 years ago, before I went into the mental health hospital, so, and I haven't actually done it on anybody till just recently, because I knew
Yeah.
as a healer,
Yeah.
my stuff wasn't right. And when you're talking about being like a tuning fork, what's mine, what's theirs, I had to be absolutely crystal clear.
Yeah.
Because you're taking it on anyway, so if you don't know what's yours and you don't know
Yeah.
what's theirs, you can't assist anybody. That's just,
It's interesting, I remember listening to the Dalai Lama, where he was asked, you know, how do you handle really difficult, people with difficult energy,
Right.
you know, and he said very simply, it's often very direct, and he just said very simply, I keep them out.
yeah.
And at the time he said that, I was quite struck, it almost sounds harsh. The
Yeah.
Dalai Lama, he keeps people out, but now I get what he means, that you do have to plug the holes in the boat
Yeah.
sometimes, because protecting yourself is important. Because if you're not doing that, you can't really help other people all that well.
Yeah,
either,
and I also
so-
like it's again like this is different for everyone, but it's like when we change our internal stuff, sometimes the stuff around us changes, and there's real like there's interesting studies with his energy as well too, of like crime rates go down in the cities he speaks to. So
And then-
it's like, and just by like that level of consciousness
Yeah.
being there, it's like
Yeah.
that might actually have a deeper meaning of like
Mhm.
his energy is so strong
Yeah.
and like so sacred that it actually like doesn't allow
Emanates.
that in
Yeah.
not an aggressive way or
You're
kind of
right,
like
yeah.
a way of having to do
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I've had those experiences. I've had clients have those experiences when they shift enough inside of themselves. Like it doesn't change everybody and people are still themselves, but sometimes it can change the interactions a bit more where you're like, this isn't the same energy dynamics.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of like the reactive dog training of like, if your energy's in this place, you might get a very different reaction
Mhm.
from someone else.
Well,
Yeah.
the dog is an absolute,
No.
cat, I think the cat's actually the absolute empath.
Well, animals don't have the like conscious,
The dogs
like
just
rational
love you,
mind or things.
they're God, you know, DOG,
Yeah.
GOD. But cats are next level. Pay attention, if the cat doesn't like you, then no go. No go.
So if in the moment, we talked about meditation as a formal practice, as a way of allowing the intuitive side to appear, how do we use intuition in the moment? How can we open to that intuitive sense when our conscious mind is babbling away at us?
Yeah, I think for most things in life, I mean, sometimes if it's really meant to come through, it may just come through really strongly, even if you're in all that. Like for people who have like warning messages or like really bad feelings, like it may just get your attention anyway. Like sometimes people have like a like stop or like don't go there, slow down, and it's like what the heck was that? I've had different experiences with that too, but I think for most day-to-day stuff, like most of us live in kind of a chronic stress situation, or like we're worried about different things, but it may not be like an immediate there. Like usually immediate, it's like our fight, flight, freeze kind of kicks in, or like we're just coping with it. But if it's a longer term thing, I think it is more about actually getting out, like making space to just be, which feels non-productive and feels like we're not doing anything. But it's like that is the time where you need to, even if you don't want to, and it's easy to think about it, or like call people for different answers or Google something. Like it's like go for a walk in nature, like have your practices where it creates the conditions where this can come in if something is going to come in. But it's not likely to really come in the same way if we're just like spiraling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Feng Shui works for me.
It just always has.
Maybe in another talk, Katie, we could discuss it, just leading off from Phil's comment, the role of compassion in intuition and with empaths, because part of what I may have been getting at this, Phil, is this notion, what do you do with it in the moment? How do we use our intuition in a compassionate way, where we can use it for decision making for ourselves and as personal guides? I'd love to hear you talk more about what happens when we move our
Well, I think there's a
focus
piece too,
outward.
like I like the piece of like the Carl Jung quote too, because it's like that's what I find in a lot of work too, is like sometimes that intuitive connection can be connecting with like something higher or something that is a more like unconditional loving source that's kind of like beyond human, however you want to define that. And it's not just us practicing compassion, it's actually like it's a two-way, like it's a receiving of like this knowing or this love or this resiliency. Like I think just with the changing face of the world too, I'm in a few number of therapist groups and other things kind of around the world, and like the burnout rate is going higher and higher, and people are kind of talking behind the scenes about like, well, how do you help people with these questions that we're struggling with too? Like cognitive behavior can only go so far. Like, well, what's another rational thought in the face of like disaster and climate change and all this, like, and I honestly don't think I'd still be in this profession or doing this work or doing well in it without that spiritual piece, because it's like when that comes through, it's like so profound, and it's like it's so profound for me every time too, and just like it's so much for clients that they can keep coming back to that, they can keep building that bridge for themselves there too, of like, because it's like each of us, I think, have our own kind of like soul purpose, not in a like we're here to have a job to do, like, and if you don't do it, you're failing kind of way. But when you connect with your intuitive kind of calling, you're like, this is my piece to bring in. Like, even if it's just parenting, even if it's just these are ways I can help, it's still like unlearning and helping with this systemic change, but it's this sense of something so much bigger than our human stuff.
I really like that distinction you made between the ego journey and the soul journey. That was really that crystallized a lot for me in what you were saying. So what are the three? I noticed that we're almost to the end of our session. What are, if you had to summarize three key points from your talk? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, they give me an outline, so I know.
You saw this coming. How would you summarize your talk in three nuggets of?
I'd say that it's real, and it doesn't mean you're going crazy necessarily or anything like that. Like, it doesn't mean it's a problem. That there's ways, like, it's accessible to all of us, and I think it's also important to know that piece for yourself too, because that'll help guide you on like what advice feels right or true for you, and that there's a lot of benefit that can come with it. And again, it's like a process. Like, have fun with it, keep it light, journey, not a destination kind of thing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.